Hello, it's Dr. Tirrell. This is just a brief video to keep the class up to speed about what's going on now and where things are going in the coming days and weeks. Again, I know folks had issues with the weather and are having issues with travel. So, of course, if you're having continuing problems, please just keep in contact with me. Email is generally the best way. So that we can make sure everything's getting done and all of your problems are being addressed. So please feel free to shoot me an email if you're having any difficulty in terms of keeping up with assignments or making it to class or whatever. Excuse me. So as I say, we're just going to sort of go through the calendar where things are right now, take a look at what's coming up so that we are all on the same page. I'm also going to show you a few things about the current project, the instructions project. We're going to look at a few student examples via camera, and we'll talk about things like drafts and usability testing because that's coming up next week. But I won't see you guys before then, you folks before then, so I want to make sure everyone's comfortable with that. If at any point you have any questions, you can always just shoot me an email. Okay, let me just share my screen with you and we'll take a look here. Okay, so just taking a look at the calendar here. Sorry, I've got a bunch of pop-ups here I'm gonna get rid of. So right now, as I mentioned in my previous email to you, we want to go ahead and have our design plan in at this point. I think most folks submitted it. If you weren't able to because of weather issues, that's fine. You know, this is an unusual circumstance. Just please go ahead and try and get it in as soon as you can. Really, the main reason is I'd like to provide feedback on this because it does sort of shape the future of your project, right? And I really kind of need the design plans before I can do that. So you can see how this is structured, and we've looked at this before. And what this is really asking you to do is start developing your project, right? We had the intention document where you were identifying some possible subjects, right? At least 3. But now that we move into the design plan, we really want to start focusing on one subject. And then we really want to focus on these rhetorical issues of purpose, audience, and context. When people sort of ask about this project, really the main thing of it is figuring out where these instructions would go, a real place where these instructions would go, and a real audience that they would address, right? Because if you start thinking about the purpose, it's like, well, I want to write instructions that will cover, you know, as some of the examples said, how to cook jambalaya or how to be effective in an online video game. It's great to start with that sort of notion of subject and then move into purpose, what you want to have happen. But really the key to this is, yeah, but where are those going to appear, right? Because if you start thinking, I just want to write instructions, it's very general and it's very hard to do, right? Because where would these things actually show up? That's why we did that instructions exercise. Let me bounce this back over. With the cereal box, right? Why we did that instructions exercise is because it kind of compels you to start thinking about who is this for? You know, in this case, it was a Chinese audience, so, you know, probably they wouldn't necessarily speak English, or, you know, it wouldn't be their first language, almost certainly. And where would it appear? You know, if it's going to be on the side of a cereal box, you got constraints of physical dimensions, of how much detail in terms of visuals can be put in there, about how long the thing can be, you know, that kind of stuff. So that's why it asked you to think about issues of audience, right? Who would it be for? And context, where would it be? And, you know, because of these things, it asked, you know, make sure to include illustrations, as our project does. You know, it says you have to include something non-textual. In this case, it makes total sense because you're talking to an audience for whom English is not their first language, and it's going to be on this really small deployment. It's going to be on, you know, the side of a cereal box. So you're going to have to use visuals to communicate. I asked us to do this because it does really start making you think about where would these things be and who would actually use them. You know, our default for audience is always, well, anyone who wants to do this. But that's not helpful. That may be true, but it's not helpful because it doesn't tell us anything about, well, then how would the instructions work, right? How should they be designed? If you say they're for anybody, it gives you no information, right? Tells you nothing. If you can focus that down to, yeah, but who would actually use these? Then it tells you stuff about how you need to design, what language you can use, what visuals should be in there. How much background knowledge does this audience have that you can assume, right? That's another thing about the cereal box. One of the setup said, you can't assume that this audience is going to be familiar with the conventions of breakfast that we have in this country, right? Presumably they're dealing with different meals. Maybe it's a different time of the day. Maybe it has particular social conventions, right? If you think in this country, not to get on a tangent, but the difference between like a Sunday breakfast and your breakfast during the weekday, that's a big difference, right? So you got to think about all those things specifically. When you think about audience, if you say, well, this is for anyone who wants to do this, it's wrong. Okay, it's just wrong. That's not true. Who's actually using this? And that's going to tell you, okay, so what can I assume about their knowledge? What kind of language can I use? What kind of visual should I employ? That's so much more helpful. That's the quirk of this, is the more you get into those questions, the easier your job becomes. Because if it's for anybody, you don't know anything about how to design this, right? I'm designing it for humans. That tells you nothing. Well, it tells you some stuff. I shouldn't say that. But it doesn't tell you anything more than, okay, I know it's this particular group. I know they know this, but they don't know that. I know that their eyesight isn't great because I'm talking about, a senior citizen population. All this stuff pops out when you start examining audience and context, who's it for and where it's going to go. So that is the crux of this project. Everyone kind of asks about that. What's the main thing in this project? That's it. Where are these going to go? And it's got to be a real situation. And who's actually going to use these? Let's flip this over again. Right, so that's the crux of what we're talking about. And the design plan asks you to start working with that. I'm going to give you feedback on your design plan. It is part of the project, but if you do good faith effort, you tend to get full credit. And you're not wedded to what you put on the design plan. You can change this. Really the main job here is to make you start thinking about these rhetorical aspects. These are also rhetorical aspects, medium and features. That's, what kind of thing is it going to be, and then what kind of design elements are going to be incorporated. So I'm going to email you feedback about this. And again, it's not set in stone. You can change that as you go forward. And that is not a failure. If that happens, that is part of the design process. You start with an articulation of, this is what I think is going to happen. You get into it, you realize I got to make some changes, maybe even big changes, like a different subject. But that is not failure. That is the design process. It's just like writing a draft textually. When you rewrite sections, that's not failure. That's what writing is. You're doing research. You're doing work to figure out what's effective here. All right, so the design plan, please go ahead and have that in so I can give you feedback for it. Again, I know there are difficulties because of the weather. I'm not going to grill anyone if it's late, of course. In fact, I can't. The university just emailed and said, I can't do that. I wasn't going to. Excuse me. But again, if you are having issues, please just email me so we're all on the same page. Just let me know that it's not a big deal. And sort of related to that, the instructions exercise, that's already due, and those grades are posted on the grades page here. If you didn't get full credit for that, the main thing I saw, the people who didn't get full credit, it was almost always this. You didn't include illustrations. It does ask for illustrations, and there's a reason why. It's because this audience and context basically demands it. If it's instructions and it's on the side of a box that's going to be distributed in China, and it says, number 1, open the box. You got to think about this realistically. That's not going to do the job. So if you didn't get full credit, it's probably because you didn't include rough illustrations. If you did and didn't get full credit, just ask me. But I'm not even sure if anyone was in that boat. So that's that. That's kind of where we are now. I did ask everyone to read about the design plan, the materials analysis, and the post-mortem on your own. We're going to deal with those things later. We've done the design plan The other documents, are reflective. They're done at the end of the project, and we've done those before. Someone in another office is having a good time. You can hear them laugh. So that's where we are now. The things sort of, that are for today, although this is a weird class period. Normally we talk about our design plans in class together. We can't really do that. We would also vet the rubric. For this one, we tend to generate our rubrics ourselves. And we do tend to do that here as well, although this is a weird situation. And some of the feedback I got during our online interviews suggested, sometimes that eats up a chunk of in-class meetings, and we only have one of those a week anyway, at best. We haven't had one for 2 weeks. So I went ahead and cobbled together the rubric for this based on previous semesters. I kind of combined those together. So this is now posted. It's here on the calendar. It is also on the project page, right? The instructions project page. All these are linked up. So if you go to final instruction set, this is the rubric for it. It looks a lot like rubrics we've seen before. It breaks out the criteria, and it does provide a reminder that things should be delivered in their intended format. That's important. If you're designing a poster, you should turn in a poster. Now, for some of our delivery, our deployments, you can't really do the real thing. For example, if you were designing something for a particular website like eHow, that's a student example we'll look at, I'm not really expecting you to go on and do that. You could, actually, in that case, but that might be a little bit of a stretch. So you have to make a mock-up that's very, very close to that, or as close as is reasonable to get. In this situation, also things like product packaging. I don't expect if someone wants to do a recipe that goes on the back of, a bag of flour, I know you can't really print that out, but you can make a mock-up that's very, very close. And students have, as we'll see here in a bit. So we've got the criteria here. The grading scale is 0 to 10 this time. And really the main reason why is the final instruction set is 50% of the project grade. So just the math works better there. And 0 to 10 gives us a little bit more fine-grained control over these criteria, So we've got purpose. It effectively leads to the intended outcome by identifying, these components. That's in our textbook. Now, some of these aren't going to be, they're going to be more or less relevant depending on what you're doing, right? Safety information, maybe what you're doing doesn't really need that. There's just not significant danger in what you're doing. Materials, usually that's in there. Steps, almost always that's in there. But these are going to be more or less relevant depending on what you're doing. But all of them, of course, should lead to the intended outcome. Audience, as we just discussed, it's meaningfully shaped to a particular group. If your answer to who is this for is everybody or people who want to do this, that doesn't help you. It's not as correct an answer as you could have. A correct answer will give you information about, yeah, but what does this group know? What kind of language is appropriate for them? What kind of visuals are going to be appropriate? How much data needs to be in there, right? So audience, context, that it suits its actual authentic conditions and is practical for the corresponding task. In class, we did that exercise with putting together the whiteboards. And so we saw the differences between appropriateness of printed instructions versus video instructions. I talked about the example of, if you're changing your oil, is a video a great deployment? Maybe. People do have phones now, but even then you're risking your phone being under a car, maybe in that case, something like a disposable piece of paper or a laminated sheet that would, shrug off any oil spills, or something very disposable that could just be affixed to a can, they don't sell in cans anymore, a bottle of oil. In fact, a lot of times they do that. They're just basically kind of shrink wrapped on there. That makes a lot of sense as a format. So context, then design, the effectiveness of the design itself, the text and visuals together, or non-textual elements anyway. And then formal issues, these are things that are components of the project. So it's delivered in its real format as much as possible. It does contain some non-textual elements. You know, if you're doing something in print, as we'll look at here in a second, that might be a visual or a table, an illustration, something like that. If you're making a video, well, then that's already taken care of. You know, a lot of that isn't textual. It avoids borrowing or replicating extensively from existing materials. So that's just, you know, not, it's avoiding plagiarism basically. But then also this is a project where I do want you to generate original work and not just, you know, go on Google Images and pull a couple images off there and then say, well, that's mine. You know, I am asking you to do original work with this one. You know, that said, of course, there probably are instructions for whatever you're covering. So we can always look at those as reference material. There's nothing wrong with doing that. That's what professional practice is. But we don't copy it. You know, that gets you in legal trouble. And then reflects appropriate grammar and spelling conventions. Appropriate, not necessarily edited American English. In most cases, that's what we're doing. But I can imagine someone doing something where you wouldn't necessarily be following grammar and spelling conventions. A list is a great example. You know, maybe you're not going to, you know, a bullet list is not a complete sentence, but it's probably perfectly fine, right? So that's all this means. Appropriate grammar and spelling, not necessarily what we call good grammar or edited American English. So that's that. If you have any issues with the rubric, as always, just let me know. If your work isn't going to fit that rubric, just let me know and we'll figure it out. It's not a big deal. I just have to know ahead of time. Okay, then also looking ahead in the future before we turn to student examples and usability tests, I do want you to go ahead and keep reading chapters in our textbook. We've got chapter 5 and 6 coming up. That's dealing with document design and incorporating illustrations. Those topics are going to be relevant to what we're doing here. There is also some information about usability testing. We'll look at this in a little bit here. But this is just a sort of short page. It's in an open source textbook, basically, a wiki book about usability testing, you know, what it is and what it looks like. Now on Thursday, we do have a couple of reading responses associated with those chapters. Right? This one covers chapter 5, the other one covers chapter 6. And we've done these sorts of things before. It's asking you to, after reading the material, answer questions, right? So what does the chapter say about differences between page and screen and how those differences might change document design, right? And that is in the chapter. A question you might ask about your reader, again, in the chapter and how you might use that. And then differences between active and passive space defined in the chapter and how each could be used effectively. And then again, in the chapter, there are 5 suggestions for writing descriptive headlines. It's just right there in the chapter. You know, there's a section about writing descriptive headlines. It has 5 bulleted suggestions. I want you to explain those. Now, again, when we're dealing with these kinds of reading responses, the key that we've talked about a million times is you are referring to the chapter, right? You're linking that back up with the chapter. So you're talking about what the chapter says about these things. The reason why is I want to make sure that we're absorbing these different sources. I do ask you to look at sources both in the book and then sometimes, you know, just online. I do that because the skill to get out of this isn't what does the textbook say. I mean, that's important, but the textbook is just one resource. The skill of rhetoric and design is being able to survey the landscape, analyze it, and then respond accordingly. So how can you extract and synthesize information from multiple sources? That's the skill. It's research. You know, that's the skill to get out of this, not, you know, the textbook is set in stone. I mean, this is just one resource. It's how do I extract valuable material from all kinds of different sources. The reason why is in professional writing, when you get out of school, you're not going to have a textbook anymore. So how are you going to know what's effective? How are you going to know what's factual? That's important. How are you going to know what's right? You know, what's effective? You're going to need to be able to look at sources that aren't a textbook. They're not handed to you. You have to survey the landscape, do your own research. That's why I ask you to link this stuff up to our reading material. Yeah, so what just happened here? Share. Okay, sorry. Technical issues. So anywho, that's reading response 6. I lost my train of thought completely. Reading response 7 is similar. It has to do with the other chapter that we're looking at and using illustrations. So it asks you to read and then respond to some questions. And again, link this up with the chapter. If you have any issues with these, if you haven't been getting full credit on those, as I say, almost always it has to do with not linking it back up to the chapter. These are asking specifically about our chapter material. So, you know, providing the answers that are in the chapter will demonstrate to me, okay, well, you know, you synthesized this. But if you haven't been getting full credit, you know, and you have a question, just let me know. Please have those in by Thursday, you know, at midnight, as always. You know, that's just sort of how it is the entire semester. Now, class resumes tomorrow. Everything's supposed to be normal on Wednesday. But, you know, for whatever reason you're just having storm-related difficulties, just let me know. We can hash it out beforehand. Okay, so now let's turn to student drafts, student work, and usability tests. So let me just pop this back on me. Okay, so we've all done our design plans or wrapping those up depending on your situation. I wanted to show you some student examples because, you know, realistically, what do these things look like? Students turn in tangible stuff. So I've got some things down here. So here are some examples of tangible things students have turned in. This, for example, is something a student did that was intended to be distributed and actually hung up, I believe, at a restaurant where the student worked. So this has to do with how to set tables for banquets. You know, if someone's reserved it for banquets, this apparently is a real issue at the restaurant that, you know, because of waitstaff turnover and that kind of thing, these kinds of situations are authentic. So this is a laminated sheet with a table and non-textual element. And it's laminated because, you know, if it's hung up in a environment where it could get stained or wet or whatever, you know, the lamination addresses that, right? So that's a real situation. That's where it would go. We know it is going to be addressed, right? New waitstaff primarily because experienced people will know how to do this, but we're talking about new folks. So what kind of background knowledge are they going to have? What are they not going to have? What are they going to know? You know, they've seen the place, right? What are they not going to know? So that's an example. This is something that a person in elementary ed, I believe, made. So this is a poster that would go up in an elementary classroom. I can't remember what grade, but she did indicate that. And you can see this is essentially covering how to make an arts and crafts project. So it has textual elements. It's got non-textual visuals that actually walk the students, the young students, through how to produce this this thing. So that's an example, right? Again, great, sharp audience, and you know, we're going to know something about how to design for younger people. They are going to know some things. They're not going to know others. They're going to be able to use maybe scissors in this case, but maybe not, right? So a great example of knowledge of audience and how that shapes design and context, right? I mean, this would look exactly in place in an elementary classroom. We've got other things like this was a little, not a handout exactly, because the idea was it'd be affixed to the side of the monitors when you go to register for classes as a freshman, because it has to do with getting a degree audit, right? That's always something that's a little weird. Once you do it, you know, you get it, but those first couple of times, particularly when the audit changes, it's unusual. So this would be attached to the side of a computer monitor when freshmen are registering. There are some other examples here. Like this is a good one. A lot of people have talked about recipes. This is a cocktail recipe on the back of a gin bottle. And you can see, right, when we're dealing with issues of context, it has to be very small, but it also has to be effective. And then also issues of audience, right? Because things like alcohol are they're commodified. They're not necessarily commodities, but they're commodified, which means there's very little difference between the gin you get from one company versus the gin you get from another. Same thing's true with, laundry soap or soda or something like that. The differences are there, but they're tiny, What separates them are things like, how is it pitched, what is it, who does it try and target, and how? So who drinks this Tanqueray, who drinks this versus a different kind of gin? How is it maneuvered, and how does this go along with that audience group? You can see that really clearly with something like vodka, because vodka is so neutral. There's millions of them. You can see how they're differently pitched, right? Even though basically all vodka is the same, more or less. So this is an interesting one, and a lot of people ask me about recipes. Recipes are fine to do. You just want to think about, where would it go, right? And who would this be for? That's the crux, the situation, not the thing itself, because that'll tell you how to design. These are all in my office. It's always tricky to explain to visitors why I have empty gin bottles in here. Well, at least one of them is legitimate. So those are tangible ones. Students have also turned in electronic things. Let me share my screen here. So things ranging from, I mentioned this student was doing an entry on eHow about how to make s'mores, right? And you can see it's got visuals, so it has non-textual elements. And it's been designed to look like an eHow page, although this is just a mock-up in Word, because the student wasn't actually going to contribute this to eHow. So that notion of, I want you to turn it in its real format, but here you can see that's not really feasible, but this is a pretty close mock-up. It looks a whole lot like an eHow entry. The same thing sort of here. This was designed for the web, and this actually is a website. The idea was it would be part of an instructor's website. This student, I believe, was in accounting, and he or she designed this so that students in a class she was taking, I think it was she, would have this sort of instructional information about how to do, in this case, a pie chart in Excel, right? So this was designed to fit an instructor's website. Videos, people do videos, like here's a yoga video, sun salutations, right? So you can see it's got sort of things for expected elements that you'd associate with a yoga video. And you can see it goes through the move here. There's a cat. That's such a cat thing to do. Walking around in the background, right? Any other time would be fine, not while I'm shooting. And here's a video that covers chocolate-covered banana bites. Well, it says right there, right? Gives us a materials list, walks us through how to do it. Oops, shot vertically. Don't want to do that. Right, so you can get the gist of that. Now, when we do things like videos, and when we're doing all of these, the key is always, yeah, but where is this for, right? So if you're just throwing this on YouTube, you really need to identify what's a good context for this, right? So where would this video be embedded is a great question. If you're just saying, I'm putting it on YouTube, that's such a generic context. It doesn't give you any information. Your work is not as strong as it will be if you, for example, say, well, it's this video, but it would be embedded on this website, right? That chocolate-covered banana one, in fact, I looked at the students' other materials, and it goes in this context of healthy recipes. And she showed me, this is the website, and here are other videos, and here are the design elements that I incorporated in order to make this look like those other videos. That's so much stronger than, well, I just put it up there on YouTube. That's such a generic context. It makes your work weak. I mean, it's the same thing as like if you printed them out and then just walked around scattering them. There's no context for that, right? I mean, where is it? Who's actually going to see that? YouTube is a needle in a haystack. A specific context makes your work stronger, gets you a better grade. So those are some examples of what students have done, right? Tangible stuff, electronic stuff. Again, the crux is, where would this go? What kind of thing is it? And you want to find an authentic context for it. If you're doing a recipe, I've mentioned things like, gin bottles, the back of a package, the cereal box, or on the back of a bag of flour or something like that. A shoe box, you're putting the instructions on the underside of the shoe box. Where would this actually go? And who are you actually talking to? That's the crux. And it makes your work so much easier to do and so much stronger. So those are some examples. I'm going to give you feedback on your design plan. Again, you can change your ideas. You're not stuck with what you put in your design plan. But this gives you some real examples of what students have done in this project. Now, usability testing, that's the other side of this. And it's here on the calendar, on the 18th, so it is coming up. Let's take a look at what I'm asking for the draft usability testing. To do this, and we are going to do it on the 18th, you want to bring a draft of your instruction set. So how complete that draft is up to you. Really, as always, the more complete it is, the better feedback you can get. And that's exactly what usability testing is. It's a way to get feedback about your instructions. That's the crux. I mean, in the professional world, you don't have peer feedback. You don't have a class of people to give feedback. So we do formalized usability testing, to know that these things are effective. In class, we went through that activity where we put together whiteboards and we did some usability testing. We did a performance test, right? And when you read this assigned material, it'll break these out for you. But we watched the people put that together. We wrote down things like how long did it take? Where did they encounter frustration? How many times did they go over the same step again and again? That's a performance test. Now, you can't always do performance tests, but there are other types. There are structured ways to do usability testing just using, for example, the instructions. A location test is one example, and there's lots of different types of location test where you ask people to look at your instructions and then you survey them. How long does it take you to find this bit of information? What kind of materials do you need and where's that presented? Where are the safety warnings? That kind of stuff. And then understandability tests. Again, generally surveys about what does this person know about the process based on the instructions. So that's the gist of what usability testing is. It's a structured way to get feedback about your instructions. When you come to class on the 18th, you do want to bring in a draft of your instruction set because you're going to be administering usability tests. Also, I want a draft of your instructions. And then you're going to be delivering these or administering these usability tests. Maybe you can do a performance test. Let someone go through your instructions, actually do the process, and write down things like, how long is this going to take? In that case, you still make a test. It would just be questions for yourself. How long did it take? Where did they encounter difficulty? Did they ever exhibit frustration? Those kinds of things. Or you can do what other students have done. These are location and understandability tests, where these are surveys. You give a student, someone in your class, your draft instructions, and then you also just give them structured feedback, right? This one asks questions like, what materials are needed to complete the task? What audience do you think this instruction set is geared towards, right? It's a survey. That's what a usability test can be, a survey about the effectiveness of the instructions. So the way to think of these things, it's a structured way to get feedback about the effectiveness of your instructions. That's all a usability test is. There's different ways to do that, right? Like a performance test, we did that in class with the whiteboards. Let them do the actual thing using your instructions and evaluate it. You can do a location test, a survey about how findable information is. You can do an understandability test, have them read through the instructions and then survey questions about, do you know how to do this? What step comes after this? Those kinds of comprehension questions. So we've got other examples that students have done, like, on a scale of 1 to 10, how useful is this? How easy is the design? That's what a usability test is, a structured way to get feedback on your instructions. Okay, let me cut this back. So that's what a usability test is. So if you go ahead and take a look at what I'm asking you to do, Bring in a draft of your instruction set. It's going to be used in class, but then I also want your draft so I can give you feedback. Bring in 3 printed copies of a corresponding usability test. 2 of them are going to be used for testing in class with peers. One of them you're going to give to me. And these can be performance tests where someone's actually going through the process and you are asking questions of yourself, like how long did that take? Where did they encounter difficulty? That's something you could bring in, or you could bring in something like I just showed you, a survey about findability or comprehension. And then bring in anything else that's required for you to administer this test. If you're doing a performance test and you need to bring in something like, I've had students cover subjects like how to tune a guitar. So I had a student bring in a guitar and then do a performance test with the instructions and an actual guitar. You don't have to do that, but it's a great way to get feedback. So anything else that's required. As it says, during class, you're going to give your usability test to 2 of your fellow classmates, and then you're going to submit 1 to me. And as it says, it's what really this is, it's a form of peer review. It's structured feedback. And that means there are different benefits you get out of this. I ask you to do it because, for one, you'll get feedback that you can use. But, that may or may not be super helpful. Say, for example, you're designing an instruction set that's for a group that's very different than your peers. It's for 3rd graders. So maybe your peers aren't giving you great feedback about it, That's one of the possible benefits, but you'll also get benefits by seeing what other students are doing because you're going to be taking these yourself. And also you're getting some experience developing usability tests. Usability testing is all over the professional world. Everything is focus grouped and tested rigorously now. I mean, whole company, Google is basically a usability testing company that iterates ads. Their product really is you. And so they test the heck out of you in order to sell ads. I'm not disparaging them. That's what they do. That's how they're able to give you so much free stuff, because they're selling you. Anywho, so that's what usability testing is. That's what I'm expecting you to do. We will be in class barring another hurricane on the 18th. So I want you to go ahead and have a draft, have your usability tests, 3 copies, please, and anything else you need to complete those usability tests. You don't have to do a performance test, but certainly you can. Okay, so this has gone on quite a while. It's a lot of info, but this is a weird, it's just a weird coincidence. We had class canceled and then we had a hurricane, and here we are. So if you do have any other questions, please just contact me by email. Otherwise, that's sort of what's coming in the near future. I am going to email you feedback on your design plan just to make sure you're on a productive track and you're not wedded to it. If you decide, oh, I didn't think about this or that and I want to do something completely different, you can. The design plan is really a way for you to start thinking about those things and answering those questions. All right, so that's that. If you have any questions or anything, or if you're still having difficulty with travel or your power's been out the whole time or whatever, I don't know how you'd watch this, but just email me and we'll straighten it out. It's not a big deal. All right, I will see you folks in class. Do make sure to do the reading responses for Thursday. Classes are supposed to start as normal on Wednesday, so hopefully things are okay. And then I'll see you folks on Tuesday the 18th with a draft of your instruction set and usability tests. All right, I will see you then.